Israel, Palestine, still about her. Where there is tragedy, where there is misery, where there is hurt, where there is loss, certain narcissists swoop in like the ghouls that they are to milk the misery for their own purposes. They believe themselves to be kind, empathic individuals that see themselves as an angelic individual that is looking to bring calm, to bring support, to aid people as a consequence of the misery that they have experienced. What they don't recognize, of course, as an unaware narcissist, is that they are simply utilizing the tragedy of others for their own ends, to make themselves look good, to assert control over people by saying, look how much I care, to draw fuel by way of people's responses of thank you for caring, to manage that all-important facade. Harry's wife has a track record of utilizing the misery of others. For instance, we saw how she swooped in at Uvalde, turning it into a circus with a film crew and photographers in tow, as she supposedly paid tribute to those who'd been slaughtered, but instead all she did was utilize it for her own purposes, with particularly crass behaviours. She did it only again recently with the way that she conducted herself in relation to the World Mental Health Day Summit in New York. And it's unsurprising that she would utilize an event such as the recent massacre that has taken place in Israel as an opportunity to make it all about her. Before we get on to what she has done, it's worth referencing a brief history of the conflict that has taken place between Israel and Palestine for the purposes of going to the evidence. Back in 1947, thousands of European Jewish emigrants, many of them Holocaust survivors, boarded a ship which came to be called Exodus 1947, and they were bound for Palestine. They were heading for the Promised Land, but they were intercepted by British naval ships because Britain held Palestine at that time, and they were sent back to Europe. This incident sparked international outrage and resulted in the UK being persuaded that a UN-brokered solution was necessary to solve the Palestine crisis. A UN special committee then proposed a partition plan giving 56.47% of Palestine for a Jewish state and 44.53% for an Arab state. Palestinian representatives rejected the plan, but their Jewish counterparts accepted it. On November 29th, the UN General Assembly approved the plan, with 33 countries voting for partition, 13 voting against it, and there were 10 abstentions. In 1948-49, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, publicly reads the Proclamation of Independence. The Jewish state takes control of 77% of the territory of Mandate Palestine, according to the United Nations. For Palestinians, this date marks the Nakba, the catastrophe that heralds their subsequent displacement and dispossession. As a consequence of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fleeing towards Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordanian territory, the armies of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq attack Israel, launching the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The Arab armies are repelled, a ceasefire is declared, and new borders, more favourable to Israel, are drawn. Jordan takes control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while Egypt controls the Gaza Strip. Thus, the nation of Israel came into being, and the fact that they were seen to have taken land which belonged to the Palestinians sparked this long-running dispute, which has seen in 1956 the Second Arab-Israeli War. In 1959, Yasser Arafat set up the Palestinian organization Fatah, which became the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. In 1967, there was the Third Arab-Israeli War, or the Six-Day War. In 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War. In 1979, there was an Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement, which was sealed at Camp David, the Camp David Accords. Then in 1982, there was a controversial military mission called Operation Peace of Galilee. There were uprisings in 1987, which was basically nicknamed the War of Stones, and it was the first Intifada. In 1993, there was the Oslo Accords, signed by Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Then, in 2000, there was the second Intifada. 2002, the Israeli government began Operation Defensive Shield. And then, in 2008, there was a surprise offensive by Israel Defense Forces on Gaza. Following ceasefires and on, there has been repeated conflict taking place in this part of the world. Irrespective of what your own views might be as to who is right and who is wrong in all of this, this recently culminated in the surprise attack that took place on October the 7th, when Hamas launched a bloody assault upon Israel. This resulted in a response from members of the royal family. And I set out there for you a brief history in a neutral fashion of what has gone on, to enable people who are perhaps not so familiar with it to realise how entrenched this has been, and how, through the years, there has been repeated provocation coming from either side, and there has been attempts to resolve matters and improve relations in the Middle East between Israel and its neighbours, and that there has been repeated provocations towards Israel and by Israel. It's important to understand the history of what has gone on. Having explained all of that to you, you might be thinking, so where does Harry's wife come into all of this? Well, of course, as a consequence of the attacks, this provoked condemnation from certain quarters. And, first of all, King Charles was the first to speak out. He was appalled by the barbaric acts of terrorism in Israel, a Buckingham Palace spokesman said on Wednesday, following attacks by the Palestinian militant group Hamas. This is a situation His Majesty is extremely concerned about, and he is asked to be kept actively updated, the spokesperson said. His thoughts and prayers are with all those suffering, particularly those who have loved lost ones, but also those actively involved as we speak. This was a statement that was issued that came through Reuters. Charles, as a narcissist, but has cognitive empathy and has advisors, recognises that it is appropriate for him to speak out in the way that he did, condemning the activity that took place and describing it as barbaric acts of terrorism. Notice, it is a statement which basically condemns the acts and expresses apparent compassion for those affected by it. It doesn't talk about him other than expressing his concerns. It doesn't talk about what he's going to do. It's a straightforward statement, and his facade management recognises the appropriate way to go about it. Also, on the same day, a statement was issued by the Prince and Princess of Wales through a spokesperson that said that they were profoundly distressed by the devastating events that have unfolded in the past days. The horrors inflicted by Hamas's terrorist attack upon Israel are appalling. They utterly condemn them. As Israel exercises its right of self-defense, all Israelis and Palestinians will continue to be stalked by grief, fear, and anger in the time to come. Their Royal Highnesses hold all the victims, their families, and their friends in their hearts and minds. Again, a statement that is issued as a response to what has occurred, but also recognising that there are victims on both sides. They reference both Israel and Palestine. A statement that's been issued on behalf and coming from an empath and a normal. It expresses their concerns, but beyond that, it doesn't talk about them. It talks about the tragedy and what may well come also in terms of further loss on both sides. And yet, what has been the response of Harry's wife? Well, she was a little slow off the mark at first to do anything about it, and I'll come back to why that might be in a moment. But a statement was, after that of the King and that of the Prince and Princess of Wales was issued, which suggests to me that she became aware of their statements, which demonstrated that they were acting in a compassionate way in relation to the tragedy, and therefore her narcissism picked up on this and essentially needed to react to it. She didn't do so instinctively. She didn't, having been made aware of it, issue a statement promptly, but there was a little delay. And it would seem to me that at first she wasn't prompted to say anything about it, that she wasn't concerned or interested in it. But once she saw that the royal family, and in particular the nemesis, had something to say about it, she then had to speak. Oh, they're doing something, I'd better do something too. Oh, they're talking about the tragedy, I'd better talk about it too. Oh, they're dealing with mental health, I'm going to deal with mental health too. Anything you can do, I can do better. A short statement then was issued through the Archwell Foundation. Headed with heavy hearts, it stated, "At the Archwell Foundation, with Prince Harry and Harry's wife, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex," make sure those titles are mentioned after all, "we stand against all acts of terrorism and brutality." Fair enough. That is fair comment. "We are supporting our partners and organisations on the front lines in Israel to provide the urgent aid needed and to help all innocent victims of this inconscionable level of human suffering." So there's an expression of apparent compassion there, but do you notice the difference between what King Charles stated through a spokesperson, what the Prince and Princess of Wales stated through a spokesperson, and what was written at Archwell? Yes, it's immediately about her. We are supporting our partners and organisations on the front lines. Look, we're doing things. Now, you might think to yourself, well, isn't that good that something is being done? It is, but it's all about demonstrating her. Look, we're partnering again. Yes, we regularly see this with pronouncements from Harry's wife through Archwell, piggybacking off the good work of others and stealing the credit, demonstrating her sense of entitlement. And here, rather than just condemn the actions that have taken place and express compassion for those affected by it, she has to ensure that, look, we're doing something, by the way. It demonstrates, as always, her inability to read the situation, prompted by the absence of emotional empathy and her misfiring cognitive empathy. Charles is also a narcissist, but he got it far more accurate because his cognitive empathy is able to judge the situation more accurately. She doesn't. It has to be about what we're doing. Tell the world what we're doing. Make me look good. Yeah, but this is off the back of a terrible attack and people are losing their lives on either side. Shouldn't we just express concern about that? Condemnation, compassion, people in our thoughts, etc. No. Make sure you mention that we're doing something as well. It makes us look good. Shows that we're doing something. That other lot, they didn't say anything about what they're doing. They just issue statements. This crassness is something that runs through much of what she does. Why? Because it's driven by her brand of narcissism. Now, interestingly, there are those amongst her supporters who are pro-Palestine. They're entitled to take that view in the same way that people are entitled to have a pro-Israeli stance. And I noticed when looking around on the internet that she was receiving some condemnation for the failure to mention both sides. There was naturally condemnation about this partnering that she engages in, but even people on sites which ordinarily are pro-Sussex made the comment that at least William and Kate mentioned Palestine in their comment, whereas Harry's wife doesn't. And it's interesting because it seems to me that part of the demographic that supports Harry's wife is probably more likely to be pro-Palestinian, and that they actually may well see that the nature of this statement, which talks about Israel but not Palestine, actually causes some consternation amongst a section of her supporters. Thus, not only was she slow out of the gate with the statement, and she's engaged in the usual making it about her, she may also have irked a section of her own support. What do you think about the statement that was issued in terms of the timing and its content? Let me know in the comments section. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.